All right. In ancient Greek mythology, which I'm sure y'all are up on, there's a legend of a king named Sisyphus, who was the founder of a city called Ephyra. This king, who had a reputation for being violent and always up to no good, was somehow able on 2 different occasions to cheat death through his own trickery to the gods, if you will. Well, the gods weren't necessarily pleased with this and his deceptive ways. And so they decided among themselves that this would be his punishment, that he would be required for time everlasting to push an immense boulder up a hill. And every time he almost reached the top, the boulder would move or do something and it would roll back down to the bottom of the hill, where he would have to start again pushing it back up the hill. He was, in effect, sentenced to an eternity of hard labor that was wrapped up in futility. Now, there's a great many jokes that I could put in here about futility. I'll let you pick your favorite. Of course, if they really wanted him to experience futility, they could have given him teenagers to raise. Like that one? Of course, if they really wanted him to experience futility, they could have put him in charge of finding something good to watch on TV. Okay? If they really wanted him to experience futility, they could have made him a Dallas Cowboys fan.
All right. No.
That is an exercise in futility with them winning it. Okay. Or, of course, if they really wanted him to experience futility, they could have made him live his life in the ministry. Okay, that one wasn't as funny. It was to me. Okay, so that was his payback, okay? Eternal futility. Hard work that ultimately got him nowhere. Anyone who has ever felt like that they were in a futile situation, knows how cruel that can be. And if you were actually made to be in futile circumstances all the time, that would just be a cruel type of punishment for anybody to have to go through. This is the second week of what will turn out to be a 3-part series. And we're focusing in on 3 different verses in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. If you want to turn there. 2 Corinthians chapter 4. These verses are built on the phrase, therefore we do not give up or lose heart. 2 Corinthians 4, verses 16 through 18 says, therefore we do not give up. Even though our outer person is being destroyed, our inner person is being renewed day by day. For our momentary light affliction is producing for us an absolutely incomparable eternal weight of glory. So we do not focus on what is seen, but what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. These sermons, I guess you could say, are for those that may be discouraged, for the disillusioned, the disenchanted. They're for all who sometimes feel that life is an exercise in futility, like rolling a heavy boulder up a hill over and over and over again. The Apostle Paul, who wrote the book of 2 Corinthians, certainly could have succumbed to that feeling of futility if he had allowed himself to. Even though he experienced one setback after another, and we looked at those a little bit last week, he had one disappointing encounter and an outcome after another. He still remained confident and upbeat throughout it all. Well, how did he do that? Well, as we saw last week, he made it a point to renew his heart, mind, and spirit every day. He took control of his thoughts. He spent time in the Word, time alone in the presence of God, and he invested his life into service to others. For Paul, every day he found time for a time of refreshing. The second reason Paul didn't lose heart, as we're going to see tonight, is that he refused to surrender to futility. He never fell back on the what's the use excuse. Every church, certainly every pastor and staff member, every leader, every parent, every spouse, and I dare say even every follower of Christ will face a situation in which they can almost justifiably ask themselves, what's the use? Why do I put myself through this? I try and I try and I try, but I don't get anywhere. Just as I think that I've made a little bit of progress, the boulder rolls back down to the bottom of the hill. And I find myself exactly where I was before I started. So what's the use? Why even bother at all? You may be in that situation right now. You may be in the verge of losing heart. I know a lot of people are, especially after all that we've been through over the last, 18 months or so? And we still have an uphill climb ahead of us. And there are some who don't feel all that optimistic about the future. So I would imagine we're tempted at times to say, it's futile even to try. We can be sure, however, that there is more to life, much more to life, that can be observed from our limited point of view. And we can learn to see this life, each difficult day that we endure, from God's eternal perspective. This is why Paul didn't lose heart. And it's why you need to not lose heart either. What you're dealing with today may be difficult, but there's nothing futile about it. Look back, if you will, in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. We're going to look at just the very first part of 16, and then 17, verse 17 is where we're going to focus on. The very first part of 16. Therefore, we do not give up. And then verse 17. For our momentary light affliction is producing for us an absolutely incomparable eternal weight of glory. Now, regardless of how it may sometimes seem, life isn't futile. It's filled with promise and hope and more than we can contain when we look at life through the lens of God's Word. So if you're struggling with some what's the use kind of issues, tonight I want to challenge you to remind yourself to remember, as often as you can, these three foundational truths of the Christian life. First of all, remind yourself that what I'm dealing with today is nothing compared to what lies ahead. Our challenge is to get our eyes off of the current situation and on to the fullness of our inheritance that we get through Christ. When we see clearly the inheritance that awaits us, we understand that any difficulties we face today are truly light and momentary. Just imagine, if you will, that you've just gotten a job. The ultimate job has great pay, 6 figures. full benefits, ideal hours, a corner office with a view of the skyline, or for you all, a corner office with a view of the lake. How about that? A supportive boss, a culture of cooperation amongst all of your co-workers, and free donuts. Okay? It's a perfect job except for one thing. Sometimes when you're shuffling the papers around on your desk, you get a paper cut. Unfortunately, you get a paper cut almost every day. So you're thinking about turning in your notice. Some people don't realize this, but paper cuts can really be annoying. You know, there are times that you have a paper cut and you don't realize you have one until you're peeling an orange. And then it burns like fire. Paper cuts make it difficult to play the guitar. They make it difficult to tie your shoes, or to knit, or write, or type, or swipe across your phone screen. I'm not overstating my case when I talk about how traumatic paper cuts can be. Except, I actually am kind of overstating that case. Because it would be ridiculous to leave such a cushy job over such a minor inconvenience. It's a small price to pay for such perfect working conditions. And that's kind of what Paul is saying here. These problems that you're facing right now, they're like a paper cut. They're nothing compared to the fullness of your inheritance in Jesus Christ. That's why Paul also said in the book of Romans, in Romans 8:18, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is going to be revealed to us." If whatever is happening in this moment is all that you can see, and you can't see anything else, then yes, that paper cut is really annoying. In fact, it's probably the worst thing imaginable. But if you can see beyond this moment and see what God is doing and the future that He has planned for each of us and the eternity that you're going to have, that you get to spend with Him, then a paper cut kind of becomes meaningless. And that's all that all of our problems are. And I want to make it clear that when I talk about God's plan for your future, I'm not talking about only heaven. Now, yes, ultimately, that's where our inheritance awaits. But God has blessings in store for each of us now. As soon as the next harvest, there are victories that He wants us to experience now. The light and momentary troubles that we have to endure today are mere paper cuts compared to the blessings that He wants to pour out on you and on your family, on your life. And here's the second thing that we need to remember. That what I'm dealing with today is doing me more good than harm. Look again at verse 17. For our momentary light affliction is producing for us an absolutely incomparable eternal weight of glory. Now, I read most of these out of the Holman. Let me read that in the NIV. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. In other words, they're working for us, not against us. A good example of this is the Apostle Paul himself. His dream was to go to Rome and do ministry there among the believers. But that's not what happened. He did go to Rome, but he was in shackles, and he went to Rome and was put in prison. And it appeared from the looks of things that his ministry plans had come to a screeching halt. So what did he say? Well, it looks like it's time to wave the white flag and call it a day. Devil gets to win this round. No, that's not even close to what he said. He said, now I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has actually resulted in the advance of the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to everyone else that my imprisonment is in the cause of Christ. Most of the brothers in the Lord have gained confidence from my imprisonment and dare even more to speak the message fearlessly. Now, most people would say, I'm in prison for preaching the gospel? Well, that's the worst thing that could possibly happen. But Paul, he says, you know what? I'm going to take this as a win. When Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery, an outside observer may have never guessed that God was going to use that situation to save a nation and bring honor to his people. But that's exactly what happened. Later, when Joseph and his brothers had a chance to clear the air, he said to them, you intended to do me harm, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. This is important to remember. What you're dealing with today isn't happening to you. It's happening for you. And it's happening for the benefit of others as well. Because God takes every situation and causes all things to work together for good. If we actually believe Scripture. In mystery stories, a writer will sometimes reveal what seems to be a clue, what seems to be evidence, but it's actually designed to send a certain character, maybe even the reader, off in the wrong direction. I'm sure you're familiar with the term. It's called a red herring. Its job is only to distract you, to keep you looking in the wrong place and focused on the wrong thing. And the problem is we sometimes fall for red herrings. Miss Marple never does. Angela Lansbury never does. Perry Mason never does. This situation that you're dealing with today, it's a red herring. It wants you to look only at the problem and not at the solution. It wants you to see only your sin, but not your salvation. It wants you to see only the wounds and only the scars, but not the victory that's coming afterwards, that's coming your way. Don't be hoodwinked by a plot device that not even a B-movie private eye would fall for. See this moment for what it is. God is using your circumstances to your advantage. Right this very moment. Recognize it and remember it. And then here's the third point to remember. What I'm dealing with today is merely a short-term situation. This problem, whatever it is, won't last, but you will. In this verse, Paul uses a couple of terms differently than we might expect. For example, we often think of our problems as heavy and burdensome, bearing down on us. And we think of happiness as fleeting, as as light and breezy. But Paul makes a different comparison. Look again at verse 17. For a momentary light affliction is producing for us an absolutely incomparable eternal weight of glory. He says our afflictions, our problems are light, and the glory that awaits us is weighty or heavy. So what does he mean? Well, let's first consider the weight of glory. It's like a ton of granite. Sometimes, some types of success are here today and gone tomorrow, but not the inheritance that God has planned for you and me. It's not going anywhere. It's set in stone. It's strong. It's secure. It's never going to budge. It will always be there. Now, what about our problems? Well, they're like perhaps a dandelion. Have you ever noticed that no fortress have ever been built from dandelion seeds? That's because dandelions are fragile. Their existence is fleeting. It takes a mere puff of wind and the seeds are gone. Paul's saying your problems today, compared to the blessings that God has in store for you, are like the difference between a dandelion and a mountain made out of granite. That granite isn't going anywhere, but one poof, and the dandelion's gone. When a teenage boy named David fought Goliath, you know how the story ends. But he didn't listen to what his brothers and the rest of the soldiers in the army were saying. That Goliath was an undefeatable foe. No, David said this: who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And then he said to Goliath, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. He was saying, in effect, Goliath, you're a dandelion. And me, I'm standing on the rock of ages. Get ready to be poofed. Every difficulty that you're facing today is a dandelion compared to the power of God. Even the problems that are the most painful and persistent ultimately pale in light of God's eternal glory. Remind yourself of that on a daily basis. The situation will not last, but I will. King Sisyphus was sentenced to never-ending processes of pushing the boulder up the hill only to have it roll back to the bottom. Today, his name is synonymous with futility. For believers, the word futility shouldn't exist, because there's nothing that you do in service to God that could ever qualify as futile, because God is causing it all to work together for your good and for His glory. He redeems even our light and momentary troubles, to see them for what they are in comparison to what He has prepared for you. Your problems are like a paper cut. They're just a minor inconvenience. They're like a red herring. They're a temporary distraction. And they're like a dandelion, ultimately fragile and fleeting. And rather than focusing on these light and momentary troubles, we need to focus instead on all that God wants to accomplish in our lives. Some of our troubles may be resolved in the not too distant future, in the weeks or months or years to come. And to be sure, some of your troubles will find their final resolution once you hit eternity. But you can be sure that God will redeem each and every one. God isn't a boulder of futility that rolls up and down a hill. He's the rock that never rolls. He's the stone that can't be moved. And His glory outweighs every light and momentary difficulty that we face. What you're dealing with today won't last forever. But you will. And that's the promise that God has for each of us. Take out your prayer sheets, if you would.